Welcome to the Graphics webinar. I apologize for the slight delay in getting started. We had a small technical problem, but we seem to have resolved it. I'm David Goldstein. I'm going to walk you through some Graphics charts today that will help you improve the product profitability, or think about how to improve product profitability. We're going to go through three types of charts. We're going to look at charts that can show you profitability trends, comparing over time, comparing to competitors. We're then going to drill down and take a look at charts that show you profit by region or product or customer segment, so you can look at either costs or revenues and see where you might find some places where they can be improved. And finally, we're going to take a look at charts that can show how product improvement will change over time. If you're going to implement a product improvement plan, how can you show the impact of that plan in a chart? One of my colleagues will be taking questions using the chat function in GoToWebinar. So feel free to ask them as we go along. I will stick around at the end of the webinar in about 25 minutes, and I'm available to answer any other questions. We're also recording this webinar. We will put the recording up on the web, and we will also be putting this slide deck up on the web. So let me just jump in and get started and take a look first at profit over time. So if you're getting started looking at product profitability, one of the first questions you might want to ask is, how is my profit changing over time? To illustrate that, I like to use a stacked bar chart. This is a good example. Here I'm showing revenue as positive in the stacked bar, costs as negative, and profits as what we call a net line running across the stacked bar. And here you're seeing a few things if you take a look at this chart. One is that while both revenues and costs are growing, profits are relatively flat. And you can see that by looking at the data. You can see that by looking at the CAGR column, which appears on the right. You can see that revenues are growing a little under 7%, costs are growing about 7.5%, and our profits are only growing about 1%. And you can see it also down here in the data row, which is a row for our margins, and our margins are actually shrinking over time from around 11% in 2012 to just over 9% in 2015. So it's a good chart to give you an overall picture of how profits are changing over time. If I want to drill down and take a look at this in Graphics, I want to just show you a couple of things on the chart. So I'm going to double-click the chart to open Graphics. You can see we've got the Graphics menu right here on the top. Then I wanted to show you how I structured the bars in series. So if I want my my profits to show as a net line just in my bars and series, I just click on show EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes, as a net line, and show EBIT margin as a data row, and under bars show this CAGR column as a CAGR column. So that's all I need to do to get this formatted the way I wanted. And the other thing, to align my legends with my CAGR column, I would just go into my format legend, and if you've got a CAGR column, the legend position aligned to CAGR is the one that you might want. You can also get at that by just right-clicking on your legend and selecting Align to CAGR. So just those few little tips will turn a relatively simple stacked bar chart into a stacked bar chart that gives you a really good sense of how your profits, how your revenues, and how your costs are changing over time. Next thing you want to do when you're looking at profits is you want to take a look at how your profits compare across to your competitors. So here again, we're back at a stacked bar chart. This is even simpler than the first. The overall message, though, is pretty clear. Even though BMW's profits have gone down over time, they are still higher than the industry average and higher than any of their major competitors. And I did that with a simple stacked bar chart where I added an average line to the stacked bar. And you can really see that very simply. Couple things, the two things I did. One is I changed the color of this bar. So just the segment BMW, just click on it and change its color here to raw sienna. If I wanted it to be a little darker, I could make it a little darker. And the other thing I did here was just add an average line, which comes right here. And if I want to format that average line, I can right-click, say Format Average Line, bring up my average line dialog, and then say, well, let's make this 1 decimal place so it corresponds with all the other bar totals, which are also shown at 1 decimal place. So that gives you our profit comparison. Next chart, I'm going to give you a little bit more complex way of taking a look at profitability compared to a competitor. This is one of our more sophisticated, more advanced charts, and we call this an ROS versus RMS chart. So it's a chart that you would use to compare profitability to relative market share. It's a good chart if you're in an industry where scale matters, where having a greater market share should lead to a greater profit. If you're in an industry like that, and automotive would be a good example of that sort of industry, you would expect to see that your companies would line up along a diagonal. And this chart adds this normative band, which allows you to see all the companies that sort of fall in a normal range of size, which is relative market share, versus profitability. And you can see that most of the automotive companies fall in that range, where we capture relative market share by comparing your market share to the market share of your largest competitors. So everyone sitting around 1, those are going to be the largest competitors in the market, and the ones that are smaller, like here BMW, is around 20% of its largest competitor, which in this case would be Toyota. And you can see that BMW and Daimler, which are the luxury car manufacturers, for them, they get higher profit margins even though they are relatively small, whereas some of the GM and Fiat Chrysler are below expectations in their with respect to comparing their profits to their market share. You get that chart right here in the Macrographics tab. We have a whole bunch of different bubble charts, and one of those bubble charts is this ROS versus RMS chart. And that sort of lays your chart out with the normative bands where you want them to be, and also with a log scale on the x-axis, which is what you'd like, and a linear scale on the y-axis. So if you've got the data, and if your industry is scale related, then this ROS RMS chart can be a nice one to add to your deck. So let me move right along, and people are asking. I'm getting a note from my from my colleagues to say that people would like to see the data behind the charts. And I am happy to show you the data behind the charts and how they're organized. In the bubble charts, the data are organized into 3 columns. You can get at your data just by clicking on the Chart Data tab. Brings up this little data editor. So in a bubble chart, you really just have the 3 columns. Each column has bubble has an X value, which is placed on the X-axis, is placed on the Y-axis, and the bubble size. And the bubble size here would be related to the revenue for that company. So Toyota's revenue is 188 units, billion euros per year, and you can see that in the reference bubble. I will quickly go back and show the data for the other couple of charts that I did. For the stacked bar chart, the data are also relatively straightforward. So it's just by year. And then with my CAGR column, and in my CAGR column, I've got a formula which allows me to compute the growth rate. And this is a Mechographics formula which says start with the data in year 2012 and with the data in year 2015 and compute over 3 periods. So we use that formula for the 3 CAGR values that we have, and you've got your cost, revenues, and profits, and your margin as rows in the data set. And the profit comparison chart, even simpler. I'm just going to have 1 row of data for each one item, the profit margin for each company. Okay, great. Getting back on track. Second thing I want to do is drill down. I'm going to now take a look at why profits are high or low, and I'm going to drill down by region. I can drill down by product, or by market segment, or by customer. I can look at product profitability. I can look at costs that way. So I've got a few charts in my drill down that I want to work you through, and I will promise to show the data for these charts as well. The first are a couple of Barmeco charts. I'm a big fan of Barmeco charts. Barmeco charts are great if you're looking at 2 variables and you want to show them, where one is a market size variable, which you will put on your x-axis, and the other is a percentage variable, which you'll put on your y-axis. So in this case, the percentage variable is year-over-year growth. If I had the data by region, I might want to show profitability as my percentage variable, but we didn't have profitability data for the different regions or the different brands for BMW. But you can see here that in the Barmeco, that my largest region, Europe, is also my most profitable, but my next 2 largest regions, Americas and China, are surprisingly very much laggards in profits, and I'm making decent margins, decent growth, sorry, in the rest of the world. And by brand, my growth is strongest in my smaller brands, which only make up 20% of my sales, my Mini and motorcycles, whereas the main BMW brand is seeing much lower growth. So double-clicking here, I can show you how the data are organized for these charts. If I open chart data, here data are very simple because really I only have two data points for each region. I've got year-over-year sales growth and percent of sales laid out this way. And to take year-over-year sales and say, to take percent of sales and make that both my width, which I want it to be of my bars, and a data column, I can just right-click and say Show Series, Set as Bar Width, and Show Series as Data Row, both of which are selected in I've selected both of which here. And for year-over-year sales growth, I'm just showing the series on the chart, which would put it on the y-axis of the chart. So, and that is the same as the way the data are structured for growth by brand. So here you're also seeing, you're also seeing both year-over-year sales growth and percent of sales are my data for each division. So just six data points to make up this chart. So again, the bar mechos are a great chart for that kind of comparison. Next, I want to show profitability by relating sales to profits for each of my product lines. And I'm doing that in a 100% stacked bar chart. And the message here is pretty clear. And I've organized that by my different product lines. First, my sedans, if you know anything about the BMW product line, followed by my SUVs, and then the rest of the product line, minis and other. And you can see that my two smallest sedans, the 1s and the 3s, make up about 40% of my sales, but only about 10% of my profits. So that's a big call out there in terms of profitability. The data are organized very simply with just two columns, one for sales percent and one for profit percent. And a few things you can do to make this chart look a little different. If you want to show the percentages, you would basically just show all of your labels, and in those labels you would show the values and the name. So that would get your percentages there. You might want to just show the values and show your names in a legend, and then spread out your legend. So another alternative, Mechographics is great at providing you with alternative ways to show your data. We see sometimes if you're kind of a high-level consultant presenting to a board, presenting to the board of directors, maybe you want to have minimal numbers, but if you're doing reporting to a CFO, maybe you want to put more numbers in your charts. Mechographics gives you that ability to go from kind of a low data, more visual chart to also a more data intensive chart. And those changes are pretty easy to make with Mechographics, just by playing with the labels and whether you hide or show axes and do things like that. So the other way I wanted to look at product profitability was in a Marameco chart. You would guess that somewhere along the line in a Mechographics presentation that I make, I would put a Marameco chart in. And here's the Marameco chart. And here I'm also just taking the same profitability data that I have in this column of the slide and showing it by product line, by product grouped into product lines. So I'm grouping into my 3 product lines, my sedans, or my cars, my SUVs, and everything else. And here the data are organized diagonally. So I don't have, each of my series is in a unique bar. So all of my 1 through 7 series are in the first bar. My SUVs X1 to X6 are in the second bar, and my others are in the third bar. So this is common for a Marimekko chart, that each of your series each of your bars has a unique set of series. Sometimes the charts have series that go across bars, but oftentimes it's organized like this. Here in the Marimekko, it's pretty clear that your biggest profits are coming from your mid to large size cars, your 5 series sedans and your 5 series SUVs. Sometimes in a Marimekko chart, you want to sort your bars so the biggest data is on the bottom. Here I'm sorted from smallest to largest car size, so the order kind of is important from that perspective. But if I wanted to look at it another way, I would just go into my format chart, click on sort, and just sort with my biggest on the bottom. So just a different look. You might want to do that. You can also, in Mekko Graphics, exclude a series from a sort if you always want it to appear on the bottom or always want it to appear on the top. If you have a lot of smaller data, you can group them into another series, which also always appears. You can structure it so that also always appears on the top. So again, a lot of freedom in Mekko Graphics. I think for this chart, I kind of like a little better the old way. 2 more charts, and I'm wrapping up pretty well on time, which is great. Charts that let you look at how you're going to improve your profits. So one simple and one a little more complex. So a cost improvement chart. I wanted to show cost improvement with a pretty simple stacked bar chart, and this is often the case where you go out and take a look at all of your competitors and see what their costs are and use that as a benchmark for improving your costs. So here we went out and looked at all of the major auto manufacturers and looked at each of their costs for percentage of raw material, purchase parts, manufacturing, and everything else, and their costs are significantly lower than BMW's. So then I can set a target for BMW. So here my data are organized very simply into 2 bars and 4 series with the costs there. And then all I did was add an average line, which I can get through right here on the top of Mekko Graphics, which is going to come in some, for this chart, relatively meaningless place. I can move it to where I want it to be my target, and then I can just change this label to say from average to target. Oops. And I've got my target line, and I've got a chart that basically shows where I want my costs to be when my cost improvement program is completed. Last chart I wanted to show you is really sort of a classic chart you use if you're going to embark on a product improvement program, or pretty well any program where you want to show the impact of the changes that you're making over time. And you would do that with a cascade chart. Some people call it a waterfall chart. And what we're doing is we're starting with our current profit margin, which is 9.2%. We're projecting with our improvements to get it up to 10.75%. And we're going to do that by doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different things, and each of them has an impact on profits. And the data here are laid out just in a single a single series. So I've got a data point for each of my bars. And you can see them here. And then all I did was I added two things. Often in a cascade chart, the data will come in looking like this, and it's really hard to see the overall impact of the changes because they are overwhelmed by the size of your first and your last bars. So to make the first and last bars more reasonable size, you can insert an axis break, and then you can click on that axis break, make it a little bigger, and if you like it diagonal instead of squiggly, you can change that here as well. And here, once you add that axis break, you can see the relative size of each of these changes much more clearly. And you can add this bar comparison line, which is just right here up in the Macro Graphics menu. And you can stretch it from your first bar to your last bar, which is the default. So that gives you your classic profit improvement chart as a cascade. And that was the last chart. That's how I wanted to wrap up, to get you a sense, hopefully a sense of the different kinds of charts you can use to show both how profitable you are, where your profit is coming from, and how you can improve your profits. And if you want to know more, I will send you to our website. There's some great resources there. As I said, we are recording this webinar. We will put it up on our website for you. We will put this deck up on this presentation up on the website as well. We have a full training webinar, which is around a 90-minute webinar, which is a much more structured step through all of our chart types and all of our chart features, all of our important chart features. And we also have a chart gallery, which has got 150 charts, sort of kind of like the charts in this presentation. You can take any of these charts in this presentation or in our chart gallery and modify that using Macro Graphics. We also have in our on our website a great blog called Chart of the Week. Every week a new chart to hopefully inspire you how to use Macro Graphics differently. We also have a tips and tricks blog post called Build Your CQ. And we have through Macro Graphics, right here in our Macro Graphics menu, under Help, Ask an Expert, which will send an email to us. We can answer your charting questions or your Macro Graphics questions right there. So I know I started about 4 minutes late, which I apologize for. I'm ending about 2 minutes late, so I made up 50% of the time that I went over. I will stick around to answer questions, which you can put to me through the chat feature of Macro Graphics, and you can also reach out to me through the Ask an Expert feature, and either me or one of my colleagues will be able to answer your questions. Thank you so much, and it was great to have you on the webinar, and I will, as I said, stick around and take a look at the chat and see if there are any questions to answer.